and taught me some good lessons about that a heart really isn't complete until it's completely broken.
If they win, it'll be because I'm not out there, put it that way. And if they lose, well, it would have been worse if I was.
My emotion and my passion that I discovered for music and singing when I was about 6, 7 years old, I couldn't find it anymore. All I knew is that I can't keep doing what I'm doing. I need to just stop because this is not going anywhere good.
He had the kind of voice that could stop time. A voice so powerful it shook arenas and made millions believe in something bigger than themselves. Steve Perry was not just the lead singer of Journey, he was the voice of a generation. But then, at the peak of his fame, when most stars would fight for more tours, more records, more glory, he vanished. No farewell, no warning, no explanation. For years, fans were left with nothing but rumors. Did he lose his voice? Did illness force him out? Or was there something even darker behind his silence? The truth is far more complicated and far more heartbreaking than anyone imagined. From the secret family he rarely talks about, to the devastating love story that changed him forever, to the illness that nearly ended his career, Steve Perry's life has been filled with mystery, loss, and an unexpected comeback that stunned the music world. And once you know why he walked away and what finally pulled him back, you'll never hear "Don't Stop Believin" the same way again.
Don't stop believing. Hold on to that feeling.
Before the fame, the stadiums, and the endless spotlight, Steve Perry's story began in a small farming town in California, where music was not just a hobby, it was in his blood. Born on January 22, 1949 in Hanford, California, to Portuguese parents who had emigrated from the Azores Islands, Steve grew up with a deep connection to his heritage and a family that understood the power of song. His father, Raymond Perry, had once been a singer himself and even ran a small radio station, while his mother, Mary, born Maria Cardoso, was the emotional anchor of his childhood. But life at home was far from perfect. When Steve was just 7 years old, his parents divorced, leaving him to be raised primarily by his mother and grandparents. That moment shaped him in ways he did not yet understand, but it planted the seed of resilience that would carry him through the storms ahead. For his 12th birthday, his mother gave him a gift that would become a symbol of everything he would later chase: a gold necklace with a small pendant shaped like a musical note. It was not just jewelry, it was encouragement, a reminder that she believed in his dream. To this day, Steve is often seen wearing that necklace, a constant reminder of where it all began. That same year, during a quiet car ride with his mother, Steve experienced what he later described as the moment that changed everything. A song came on the radio, Sam Cooke's Cupid. The melody grabbed his attention instantly, but it was the voice, raw and emotional, that pierced through him. For the first time, young Steve knew exactly what he wanted. He did not just want to sing, he wanted to move people the way Sam Cooke had moved him. Yet for all the signs pointing him toward music, his early years were filled with uncertainty. By the time he reached high school, Steve was already living in Lemoore, California, where his mother had remarried a man named Marvin Patterson. Steve worked part-time jobs on his stepfather's turkey farm and spent long days under the Central Valley sun, hammering nails and carrying lumber as a carpenter. Those jobs paid the bills, but his mind was always elsewhere, listening to the radio, humming melodies, and imagining stages far beyond his small hometown. Every note, every rhythm, was a reminder of what he truly wanted: to escape, to sing, to prove himself. Still, it was not an easy dream to chase. By the time he turned 18, Steve made the bold decision to leave his comfort zone behind. He packed his bags, left the farm life, and moved to Los Angeles to try and carve a path into the music industry. There, he took whatever jobs he could find, sometimes singing jingles for commercials, sometimes working behind the mixing boards as a recording engineer at Crystal Studios. He joined local bands not as a frontman, but as a drummer, quietly learning the ropes while waiting for his chance. At the time, there was no guarantee he would ever make it, but in his heart, that little boy who once heard Sam Cooke on the radio was still chasing the same dream, certain that if he just kept going, his moment would come. But fate has a strange way of testing people before giving them what they want, and for Steve Perry, tragedy would strike long before his voice ever reached the top of the charts. When Steve Perry arrived in Los Angeles, he thought he was on the edge of something big, but instead of instant success, he faced years of frustration and rejection. He sang in commercials, tinkered with recording equipment, and bounced between small-time bands that never made it past smoky bars or garage rehearsals. Oddly enough, in some of those early groups, he was not even the lead singer. He played the drums. It seemed like the music industry was not ready to recognize the power of his voice, and for Steve, the dream he had carried since childhood began to feel further away with every passing day. Determined to create something of his own, Steve formed a new band called Alien Project. It was supposed to be his breakthrough, his chance to finally step out as a frontman. They recorded demos, shopped them around to labels, and had just enough momentum to give Steve hope. But then tragedy hit. One of the band's members, Richard Michaels, who was also a close friend of Steve's, was killed in a sudden car accident. The loss was devastating. Overnight, Alien Project dissolved, and with it, Steve's fragile optimism. Heartbroken and burned out, he packed up his dreams and returned home to work on his family's farm. At just 27 years old, Steve Perry was convinced his shot at becoming a professional singer had slipped away forever. But while Steve was struggling in obscurity, 340 kilometers north in San Francisco, another story was unfolding, one that would change his life. A band called Journey was barely holding on. Formed in 1973, Journey had gone through 3 albums without much success, and their label was close to cutting them loose. Their lead singer at the time, Robert Fleischman, did not get along with the band's manager, Herbie Herbert. Behind the scenes, Herbert quietly began looking for a replacement, digging through demo tapes sent to CBS Records. Most of them sounded forgettable, until one particular tape landed on his desk. It was a recording from Alien Project, a song titled "If You Need Me, Call Me." The moment Herbert heard Perry's voice, he knew it was something different, something electrifying. He reached out to CBS and arranged for a discreet audition in Los Angeles. Journey already had a singer, so things had to be handled in secret. During a rehearsal, Fleischman stepped out for a break and Steve was brought in. He sang just one song, but that was all it took. The manager was stunned, the band was impressed, and Steve Perry was hired on the spot. For a man who had nearly given up, it felt like a second chance at life. But joining Journey was not the instant fairy tale it might sound like. Some of the band's original fans hated the pop-influenced sound he brought with him, preferring their earlier progressive rock style. Even within the group, not everyone welcomed him at first. Some members secretly hoped Fleischman would come back, but Herbie Herbert stood firm. Steve Perry was the future of Journey, and slowly the world began to agree. In 1978, the band released Infinity, their first album with Perry as lead vocalist. For the first time, Journey cracked the Billboard Hot 100, with Wheel in the Sky climbing to number 57. It was not a blockbuster, but it was the spark they needed. By 1979, Evolution pushed them further, with Lovin', Touchin', Squeezin' becoming their first top 20 hit. The sound was changing, the momentum was building, and Steve Perry's voice was leading the charge. Still, nobody, not even Steve himself, could have predicted what would happen next, because in just a few short years, Journey would go from a struggling rock act on the edge of collapse to one of the most iconic bands of all time. And at the center of it all was a young man who had nearly walked away from music for good. By the early 1980s, Journey was no longer a struggling rock band. They were on fire. With Steve Perry at the microphone, their sound transformed into something bigger than anyone expected. In 1980, the album Departure gave fans an anthem with Any Way You Want It, but it was 1981's Escape that turned them into a worldwide phenomenon. The record exploded with 4 massive hits: Don't Stop Believin', Who's Crying Now, Stone in Love, and Open Arms. Each one showcased a different side of Perry's voice: powerful, smooth, emotional, and unforgettable. By then, Steve Perry was not just Journey's singer. He was the voice of stadium rock, a presence so strong that fans began calling him The Voice. Escape went on to sell millions of copies, but it was not just about the numbers. It was about the way the songs stuck in people's lives. Don't Stop Believin' became an anthem of hope, while Open Arms redefined what a rock ballad could be. Suddenly, Journey was not just another rock band on the radio. They were the soundtrack to countless weddings, breakups, and late-night drives. Perry's voice carried emotion that cut through everything else. Yet, as the band's fame grew, so did the tension. Journey's longtime fans accused them of abandoning their earlier progressive rock roots for radio-friendly ballads. Some critics dismissed Perry as too pop for the band. Even within Journey, there were whispers. Not everyone was comfortable with how central Perry had become. He was not just the singer anymore. He was the face of the group, and that came with its own problems. Still, Perry's star kept rising. In 1983, Journey released Frontiers, and it produced 4 more top 40 hits, including Faithfully, a ballad so powerful that fans often assumed Perry himself had written it. But the truth was more complicated. Keyboardist Jonathan Cain had written the entire song in less than half an hour, claiming it came to him like a gift. Perry may not have written it, but his delivery made it eternal. When he sang "I'm Forever Yours," faithfully, it did not sound like a lyric, it sounded like a confession. At the same time, Perry's personal life was beginning to bleed into his music. In 1984, he released his first solo album, Street Talk. It featured "Oh Sherry," a love letter to his girlfriend at the time, Sherry Swafford. The single was a massive hit, climbing the charts and dominating MTV. For many fans, it was the first time they saw Perry outside of Journey, and it proved something critics had begun whispering. Steve Perry did not need the band to be a star. By 1985, his voice was everywhere. He was invited to sing on We Are the World, joining legends like Michael Jackson, Lionel Richie, and Tina Turner. To the outside world, Steve Perry was untouchable, a rock god at the peak of his powers. But inside, cracks were forming. His mother was battling a serious illness, and Perry was being pulled between the demands of fame and the pain of watching the most important person in his life fade away. And soon tragedy would strike, leaving Perry with a loss so devastating it nearly silenced him forever. For years, Steve Perry had carried Journey on his shoulders, balancing the crushing weight of fame with the constant pressure to deliver hit after hit. But behind the screaming fans and platinum records, something far more personal was unfolding. His mother, Mary, was gravely ill. She had always been his anchor, the person who believed in him when no one else did. And now he was watching her fade away from a neurological disease that left her weaker every day. Perry tried to split his time, flying back and forth between the studio and her bedside, but the strain was unbearable. Bandmates grew frustrated over the delays, but Perry refused to apologize. His mother came first. In December 1985, just before the release of Journey's 9th album Raised on Radio, Mary passed away. For Perry, it was not just the loss of a parent, it was the collapse of the foundation his entire life rested on. When he returned to the studio, he was a different man, tired, grieving, and drained of joy. Perry pushed through the sessions out of sheer obligation, but the fire that had once fueled him was gone. Raised on Radio was a commercial success, going double platinum, but the victory felt hollow. Even as the singles climbed the charts, Perry felt like he was only going through the motions. He had promised his mother he'd stay with Journey as long as he could, but inside, he knew he was breaking. By 1987, the truth could no longer be hidden. The long tours, the endless rehearsals, the constant interviews, it all felt meaningless compared to what he had lost. His voice, once unstoppable, now felt strained. His energy was gone, and so in early 1987, Perry sat down with the band and said the words that shocked them all. "I cannot do this anymore. I need to leave." There was no anger, no drama, no fights, just exhaustion and heartbreak. At the height of their fame, Journey's lead singer walked away. 15 shows were still on the schedule, but Perry never returned. Fans were stunned. How could someone at the peak of success just vanish? The rumors spread fast. Some said he had lost his voice. Others claimed he was secretly battling cancer. A few even whispered that he had disappeared completely from the music world, never to be seen again. The truth was far less dramatic, but just as devastating. Steve Perry was broken. He had lost his mother, and with her he had lost the drive to perform. For the first time in decades, he stopped singing altogether. Not in the studio, not on stage, not even in the shower. Journey, left without their frontman, went on indefinite hiatus. For many, it felt like the end of an era, and for Steve Perry, it seemed like the dream that began with a Sam Cooke song on the radio had come to a quiet, heartbreaking close. But his disappearance only made him more of a mystery. As the years passed, the silence around Steve Perry grew louder, and the rumors only more bizarre. Some wondered if he'd ever return. Others thought his story was already over. What nobody knew was that Perry's journey was far from finished, and the next chapter would shock everyone. For nearly 7 years after leaving Journey, Steve Perry disappeared almost completely. No new music, no tours, no interviews. Fans were left with only whispers and speculation. and Perry seemed content to vanish into a quiet life far from the spotlight. Then, in 1994, the silence finally broke. Perry released his second solo album, For the Love of Strange Medicine, and it was clear that time had not dulled his voice. The single You Better Wait climbed the charts, reminding the world of the power and emotion only Steve Perry could deliver. For fans, it was proof that the voice still had it, and for a moment, it looked like he was ready to reclaim his place in rock history. But the bigger shock came 2 years later. In 1996, Journey officially reunited with Steve Perry to record their 10th studio album, Trial by Fire. The single When You Love a Woman became an instant hit, climbing into the Billboard Top 20. For die-hard fans, it was a dream come true. The classic lineup was back, and the magic was still there. A massive world tour was scheduled, and anticipation reached a fever pitch. It seemed like Journey was about to reclaim the throne they had abandoned a decade earlier. Then everything fell apart. While vacationing in Hawaii, Perry injured his hip and began experiencing unbearable pain. Doctors delivered a grim diagnosis. He had a degenerative bone disease that required immediate surgery. But Perry was not ready. At just 47 years old, the idea of a hip replacement terrified him. He hesitated, hoping to find another way. But the band grew impatient. Tour dates were hanging in the balance. Millions of dollars were on the line, and Journey's management issued an ultimatum: get the surgery, or we move on without you. For Perry, it was déjà vu. The same pressures that had driven him out before were back. Only this time, it was not just emotional pain, it was physical. Still reeling from the diagnosis, he made his choice. He walked away again. Journey, unwilling to wait, moved forward with new singers, and while some of them were talented, none could capture the magic that Perry brought. The golden era of Journey was over. Fans were heartbroken, but Perry himself was resolute. He later admitted that he simply could not bring himself to go through with the surgery at that time, and without it, touring was impossible. The decision drew criticism from some corners, but it was one Perry stood by. His health and his peace of mind came first. After leaving again, Perry retreated into an even quieter life. He made small contributions to soundtracks, collaborated on a handful of projects, and occasionally appeared in public, but the world tours and high-profile spotlight were gone. Once again, his silence fueled speculation. Had he finally retired for good? Was he hiding a bigger health battle than anyone knew? Fans debated endlessly, but Perry gave no answers. And yet, beneath the surface, his personal life was about to reveal a secret that even his most devoted followers did not see coming. Because while Perry never married, his private world held stories of love, heartbreak, and even family ties that remained hidden for decades. For all the years Steve Perry spent under the brightest lights in music, his personal life remained mostly hidden in the shadows. Unlike many of his peers who courted attention with wild romances and public scandals, Perry was notoriously private. He never married, and for decades, fans wondered why. The truth was complicated. The divorce of his parents when he was a child had left scars that never fully healed. He had watched love fall apart up close, and it made him cautious, maybe even fearful of giving himself completely. He admitted in rare interviews that while he had serious relationships, none ever felt like something he could hold on to forever. His most famous romance in the 1980s was with Sherry Swafford, the woman who inspired and starred in his solo hit Oh Sherry. To the world, their love looked unshakable. But privately, the pressures of fame, constant touring, and Perry's own reluctance to fully commit eventually pulled them apart. For years, fans assumed that was the end of Perry's story when it came to love. But buried deep in his past was another chapter, one he almost never spoke about. In his early 20s, long before Journey made him a star, Perry dated a woman who became pregnant. Unbeknownst to him, she gave birth to a daughter named Shamela. Perry would not find out until much later, when Shamela was already a teenager. At 13, she expressed a desire to meet her father, and her mother finally reached out. Perry agreed, and for the first time, he met the daughter he never knew he had. By then, he was already a household name, but in that moment, none of the fame mattered. What mattered was the quiet, awkward, but ultimately healing bond that began to grow between father and daughter. Over the years, Perry kept this relationship almost entirely private, rarely mentioning Shamela in public. But those close to him say they built a steady bond, and she eventually married and had children of her own. Today, Perry is not just a rock icon, but also a grandfather. something fans still find surprising given how fiercely he guarded his personal life. For a man who seemed to live and breathe music, family had always been a hidden part of the picture, kept out of headlines and away from the chaos of fame. Still, even with those family ties, Perry often admitted he lived a solitary life. He had friends, yes, but he often chose to live small and simple, away from Hollywood parties or music industry drama. He liked quiet dinners, riding his motorcycle, and watching baseball. It was not the glamorous life fans imagined for a rock star, but for Perry, it was peace. And yet, life has a way of pulling people back into the spotlight, sometimes in the most unexpected ways, because while Perry had resigned himself to living quietly, a chance moment in 2011, sparked not by music but by a documentary on cancer, would introduce him to someone who changed his heart forever. By 2011, Steve Perry had already lived two very different lives. One as the legendary voice of Journey, the other as a quiet recluse who seemed content to fade into the background. Music was behind him. The stage, the tours, the albums, all of it felt like another lifetime. But fate has a way of surprising people, and for Perry, it arrived in the most unexpected form. One night, while watching a documentary about breast cancer directed by Patty Jenkins, a woman caught his eye. Her name was Kelly Nash, a psychologist featured in the film who was battling late-stage cancer. Perry had never met her, never even heard her name before, but something about her presence, her smile, her strength struck him deeply. On impulse, he asked Jenkins if she could connect them. At first he hesitated, worried that it was not his place, but he could not shake the feeling that he needed to meet her. What began as a simple email quickly turned into something life-changing. Perry and Nash met for lunch, and what should have been a casual encounter became the start of the most meaningful relationship of his life. Kelly was already sick when they met, and Perry knew it. He knew her time was limited, but he did not run. For a year and a half, they were inseparable. For a man who had once avoided commitment, Perry suddenly found himself completely devoted. In interviews years later, he admitted he believed their love could somehow heal her. He wanted to believe that if he stayed, if he gave her everything he had left, it would be enough to save her. But cancer does not bend to hope. Kelly's health continued to decline, and despite Perry's determination, she passed away less than 2 years after they met. Her loss devastated him in a way that was both new and familiar. He had lost his mother decades earlier, and now he had lost the one woman who had made him believe in love again. But before she died, Kelly gave him a gift that would change his life once more. She made him promise not to disappear again. She told him to return to music, to share his voice, to live. It was a request Perry could not ignore. Her words lit a spark in him that had been missing for decades. Just 18 months after her passing, Perry appeared on stage with the alternative rock band Eels, shocking the audience, who thought they'd never see him perform again. He sang a handful of songs, and the response was electric. Fans wept, cheered, and clung to the moment, not knowing if it would happen again. But for Perry, it was not just a performance, it was a step toward honoring the woman who had changed everything. Kelly's promise became the driving force behind his eventual comeback. He began writing again, building a home studio, and slowly, carefully, preparing to re-enter a world he had left decades earlier. And when he finally returned, it was not as the frontman of Journey. It was not as the rock star from the 1980s. It was as Steve Perry, a man who had walked through loss, carried silence, and come back not for fame but for love. In 2018, 7 years after meeting Kelly Nash, and 4 years after losing her, Steve Perry finally fulfilled the promise he made. On October 5th, he released Traces, his first full-length solo album in over 2 decades. But this was not the kind of record meant to chase radio hits or climb charts. It was something far more personal. Traces was a love letter to Kelly, to his mother, to every loss and every second chance that had shaped him. Songs like No Erasing and We're Still Here were not written for stadiums. They were written for healing, both for himself and for the fans who had waited so long. Perry later admitted that creating the album was like opening his heart to the world again, piece by piece. And for listeners, it was like being reunited with an old friend they thought they'd never hear from again. When Traces debuted, it was warmly received, not just because of nostalgia, but because the emotion was undeniable. Perry was not trying to be the rock star he once was. He was not chasing the 1980s glory days of Journey. He was simply being honest. An older man looking back, still carrying the voice that made him a legend, but with a perspective shaped by time, loss, and love. In interviews, he admitted that music had once felt like a burden, but after Kelly's promise, it became a lifeline. It gave him purpose again. Today, Steve Perry lives a quiet life, far from the chaos of the music industry. He does not tour heavily, and he rarely makes public appearances, but when he does, fans describe him as warm, approachable, and deeply kind. Countless stories circulate of Perry stopping to talk with fans on the street, sharing a smile, taking a photo, or simply listening. Despite being one of the most celebrated voices in rock history, he never carries himself like a superstar. He still wears the gold musical note necklace his mother gave him at 12, a reminder that everything he achieved began with a child's dream and a mother's belief. His legacy is undeniable. Journey's songs, especially Don't Stop Believin', continue to resonate across generations, showing up in movies, TV shows, and even sports stadiums decades after their release. Perry's voice has become immortal, the kind of sound that defines an era yet never grows old. And while the band continued with other singers, no one has ever truly replaced him in the hearts of fans. But perhaps the most powerful part of Steve Perry's story is not his voice. It's the way he chose to live. He walked away from fame when it became too heavy, stayed loyal to his family when they needed him most, and returned to music not for money or recognition, but for a promise of love. His journey is a reminder that legends are not just defined by their hits. They're defined by their choices, their resilience, and their humanity. Steve Perry may have been the voice, but his story is more than just sound. It's about silence, loss, rediscovery, and the courage to return. And for fans who still hear his songs echo through the years, his life proves something simple yet profound. Sometimes the greatest legacy is not just what you sing, it's how you live after the music fades.
Happen is because a heart is not complete until it's really broken.